Thank you. You can all hear me? We're good? Awesome. Thank you so much. I hear these introductions and I feel I should look around and go, wow, I want to meet that person, because it's not me. Thank you so much for inviting me to Siloam. I am so excited to be back here. As Reverend MacGregor mentioned, I was here early in my marriage. My husband and I attended here briefly when we were students. We did our marriage prep with Rick Hawley, and it's really nice to be back again. There's something very comforting about coming back to a place that occupies a special moment in your history. So, I also feel as I'm listening to this morning's worship that I'm preaching to the choir, like, you don't need this. But I'm here anyway, and I'm going to tell a little bit of my story. And it's a bit of a story of love-hate, my love-hate relationship with church. In 2021, so a year during the pandemic, my colleague, Reverend Dr. Alan Jorgensen, and I, who is also a colleague of your ministers, we spent several months listening to the stories of parents who are raising children with disabilities as part of a research project funded by the Louisville Institute. And our goal was to understand their faith journeys, but also their spiritual care needs. And not only of parents who attended church faithfully, but we wanted to hear from people who had also left church. We worried that their voices were missing from the conversation. And using Facebook language, we sent out an invitation, a call to these parents, and we said, come tell us your story, and we want to hear from you if you are in a relationship with church, or in the language of Facebook, it's complicated. And as it turned out, it was mostly complicated. The project, as you may have guessed already, very much emerged from my own experience as the parent of a profoundly disabled and medically fragile child for 21 years. Prior to Matthew's birth, my husband Bill and I were very active in our faith community. But by the time Matthew was in grade school, we had more or less left church. Our reasons for leaving aligned with most of the research on churches and disability. Churches are often, though not always, physically inaccessible. And even if a church has improved their physical access, sometimes attitudes and theology remain problematic. Indeed, as Reverend Dr. Erin Rafferty from Princeton, in her book From Inclusion to Justice, Disability Ministry and Congregational Leadership argued, churches are often ableist institutions at their core. And sometimes they can view people with disabilities and inclusive ministries as problems to be solved. They consume scarce resources and they designate some people as experts and some people as in need of expertise, rather than a collaborative team where we work together to create a community where we all follow God together. Many churches, including the United Church of Canada, are still in the early stages of improving their accessibility and unpacking their ableist language, attitudes, and theology. So we're often like the creatures cramming into the mitten, which was so beautifully acted out this morning, where the occupants already cozy on the inside of the mitten can often find compelling reasons why they don't want the next person to come in. For our project, 20 parents shared their stories of attending church, or of leaving church, as it turned out. Virtually all the stories of staying, of leaving, of even loving church were complicated. We learned that when church worked, parents felt supported and heard and fully, radically welcomed. Parents valued churches that were accommodating and that offered practical and spiritual support. But above all, they valued a community and a space that ensured that their child and family were welcome and fully included in the activities of the church. So much so that in the early interviews, which I was involved with before my research team and research assistants joined, I was listening to all these stories. They kept talking about accommodation and inclusion. I kept thinking, this is a project about spiritual care. I'm asking the wrong questions. But then it occurred to me, there was a bit of a light bulb moment, that wait a second, for these parents, inclusion and accessibility and full welcome was spiritual care. Knowing that their child and their family and they were safe and part of the community was the most important part of their spiritual care in many ways. Unfortunately, for most of the parents in the study, they described church as unsafe, and that included people who attended church regularly. This surprised me. Church felt exclusive, and parents often felt judged. Parents struggled to feel supported, and many left church every Sunday feeling depleted rather than renewed. And this was particularly true of parents who are raising children on the autism spectrum. So as part of the interview, we asked parents to describe their relationship with church using an image. And this strategy sort of gets people to tell a story in a different way. And so today I would like to share with you one of those images and to offer my very brief reflection. At first I was stumped, said Esther, responding to the question of how she imagined her relationship with church. And I will share that all names and identifying information have been changed. I always enjoy thinking about the names I might give people in the informants in studies, so I'll usually come up with something. In my doctoral work, I used stories from my favorite childhood books. These are all names from the Bible. But then the picture that came to mind was a big cruise ship, and I'm a dinghy on the side. We don't quite fit in. We just fall outside of the ship. We've got the same goal. We want to go to the same place, but we can't get there in first class. Interestingly, Esther attends church faithfully. She is the mother of 2 children, both of whom live with disabilities. Faith has always been fundamentally important to her life. She grew up attending church, and it is a vital part of her family's world to this day. This is despite feeling like an outsider in her community. She continues to attend faithfully, she volunteers on committees, and she participates in prayer circles. The cruise metaphor describes many churches. The front door is ramped, but once people with disabilities and their families pass through that entrance, barriers, sometimes many invisible ones, are everywhere. The bathroom might not be big enough for a wheelchair and their support person. For us and our family, there was never a change table to allow us to provide care to someone bigger than a toddler. Pews remained in inconvenient places because they're beautiful antiques or are suitably positioned to enjoy scenery or lovely stained glass windows, or simply because it's where they've always been. Coffee hour sometimes includes food with common allergens, and church sanctuaries, particularly the older communities, smell like old wood, they have flickering lights, and all of these can be problems for neurodivergent parishioners. Often people with disabilities and their caregivers need to ask and even assertively advocate to be included in worship and leadership and social activities, and then often must adapt to the norms of the group rather than being included and welcomed for who they are in ways that celebrate their unique gifts and participation. The subtle message is often, if you don't adapt to our ways, including you can be bothersome or expensive or inconvenient or maybe just not worth our time because you don't come that often. Often families are often offered a list of reasons for why things must remain the same, or worse, are told a church is happy to accommodate the family only to be disappointed by tokenistic efforts and quiet complaints. The need to fit in can be exhausting for these families. Their challenges are further compounded when the passengers of the cruise ship, or maybe members of the church, look around at their surroundings and see familiar comfort, and they're genuinely surprised that other people don't appreciate and enjoy their life aboard the cruise ship. Esther's story of exclusion was shared by many parents in our study. Sarah, mother of Junia, described church as a circle of people looking inward. We're on the outside trying to tap the shoulder of the people in the circle. And they're all in this circle and they're quite happy. They have smiles on their faces and they don't understand what's happening outside of them. They have no comprehension of their exclusion. Rachel told a similar story, and these are all direct quotes. We're on the outside. It's hard to feel like you fit in, that you could be a part of things. My image of church, it would be a group of people, and we're the group beside the building, but we're not quite involved or included. Jacques Bad described the church as requiring a membership card, and Joanna said, for me, all the doors are shut and padlocked. It's like I'm not welcome. It's an image of get out. Elizabeth lamented, who is the church there for? It's not meant to be a social club of fit-ins. It's actually for the outcasts. We, the members of the church, often have this princess theology. We think we're always the one in the right, and we're the one persecuted, and we're the one that needs to defend ourselves, and sometimes we're the oppressors. We're the ones Jesus spoke strongly to. Elizabeth's description of princess theology is apt. Erna Kim Hackett, the founder of Liberated Together, a feminist blog, describes the church as always Egypt rather than the ones fleeing, or people who are struggling rather than not. I would invite you to consider the image of the cruise ship and the dinghy. Where are you in the picture? Are you on the boat, the big boat, full of good food and interesting entertainment, perhaps entertaining excursions, nice fellowship opportunities? Or are you in the dinghy? Are you tossed in the waves, clutching the sides, trying to hang on? Perhaps the spray is getting you wet and cold. And you're looking at the cruise ship thinking, I wouldn't mind being on that boat, but I'm not sure if I can get in the boat or fit in if I'm on the boat. And I have to be someone or something different to be in that community. I would ask you, how do you fit in the picture? Where are you? What part of that picture speaks to you? How do you locate yourself in the picture? I know for me, at various points in times, I have been on both boats. Life is like that. It's complicated. There have been moments that I've experienced real power and privilege and enjoyed life on the cruise ship. And there are other moments that I've been sitting on the wooden boat, really unsure about where I was going, how I was going to get there, and whether I was going to get there in one piece. So I would ask you to think about this. Think about the picture, about where you are and where you want to be. Or how do you want to change the picture? What would you redesign? How would you redraw the image? But I think we also need to ask ourselves, do we want to? Sometimes it's really comforting and comfortable to remain in a picture that is very familiar, and change is hard and frightening. It can feel very, very overwhelming. A bit, again, like our animal friends in the mitten who aren't sure about these new animals coming in with talons and thumping feet and prickly claws. It requires us to change and sometimes to require significant effort, to invest significant effort. It can feel very, very overwhelming, and it can be difficult to know where to begin, particularly in this era of changing churches and austerity. But one thing I am always reminded is that if we don't live together, if we don't learn how to live together, we can't live together. And we will never live together if we continue to perpetuate spaces or ideas or attitudes or theology that excludes people for whatever reason. For people with disabilities and their families who are struggling to be included in faith communities, the study that we were involved with, the Beyond Saints and Superheroes study, demonstrated that even families like Esther's, families who attend church faithfully, who identify strongly with church, and who value deeply church, can feel like outsiders. They can feel uncertain about their place and about which boat maybe they're on and when. And worse, sometimes churches use people with disabilities and their families in tokenistic ways that meet the congregation's altruistic needs to feel inclusive, to feel affirming, but yet in ways that don't make the first-class boat available to passengers in the dinghy. And unfortunately, the meaningful embrace of people in the dinghy often only happens as quickly as cruise ship passengers choose to allow. The cruise ship passengers are able to choose the path and the pace of the journey, while people continue to feel excluded, isolated, alone, and perhaps even frightened. Often the first step, as the creatures of the mitten showed us, is to simply invite everyone inside or on board. And together we will learn how to stretch our spaces in new and surprising ways, in ways that allow everyone to feel cozy and warm and included and welcome and protected. So I usually conclude this by simply suggesting that we should all just try to be like a mitten and learn to grow and stretch together. Thank you so much for including me in today's worship. It's been a real pleasure to share our story and a bit of the findings of our research with you. Thank you.